Hey, Husker fans, welcome to another episode of the Husker Big Red podcast. It's Friday. I'm Chris Peterson, and joining me, as always, is my co host, Danny Gillette. And Danny, how are you doing this morning?
A little bit tired. I write for the Patriots for my other sidelance job. I write for a Patriots website, so free agency is in full swing, and a little bit tired, but I'm doing good. And you know who's not resting is Matt Rule and the coaching staff as they continue to add visitors to the end of March, and we also have some Dylan Raiola news, I think. So it's fun to see. It's fun to see.
Yeah, we'll start there. Getting back into the recruiting aspect of it. Hayes Fawcett had some reporting last night about Dylan Raiola. He's going to be taking some visits starting this week. He's actually going to visit Georgia Tech this week, which was interesting and kind of a new school that hasn't been in the mix. He will visit Georgia this weekend, then of course at Nebraska, and he's going to also take a trip to the Nebraska football spring game. He'll be at the Oregon spring game next month. I don't see another trip to USC on that list, so I'm wondering if it really is finalized. But still, very good news for Nebraska. That will be kind of the third visit since February. USC obviously he took an extra kind of unofficial visit there, but he's took the dead period visit to Nebraska. So I think things are going to be evened up there. But what's your thoughts on the news of Dylan Raiola taking two visits this spring instead of one?
Well, it means that they're putting all their eggs again in one basket. I mean, especially with Daniel Kalen committing to Missouri, I believe it was. I mean, now Nebraska really has to, find a quarterback for 2024. And I guess they don't really have to find one. They can use the transfer portal. But if they want a recruited quarterback, I mean, there's no doubt that they're putting, all their focus on Dylan Raiola, which isn't a bad thing because, he's a really good quarterback, obviously. We've talked about it ad nauseum, but it just kind of means that if we miss out, then it would be a pretty sad loss due to the effort the coaching staff has put in.
Yeah, it would. It's an interesting recruitment. USC's right there, and I do expect. It wouldn't surprise me, I guess, if he ends up there for their spring game. But it could be the same. I'm not sure when it is. It could be the same as Nebraska's or Oregon's or whatever. So it doesn't seem like he's in that big of a hurry. I know he's in LA a lot for his quarterback workouts and stuff like that. So I don't know that he is in a rush to see that campus. But I am interested to see what the timeline is like and what the buzz is like, after each one of these visits. What's the buzz going to be like on Monday, after this visit to Georgia? And I think people are still discounting Georgia a little too much. Mike Bobo, the offensive coordinator there. I mean, he was the offensive coordinator when Matthew Stafford was the head coach, and Dominic Raiola played with Matthew Stafford in Detroit. So I mean, there are some ties there, and he's proven that he can coach quarterbacks. I mean, Matt Stafford was the number one overall pick. So I don't know that losing Todd Monken is going to be a huge issue for Georgia, but all along I do feel like Nebraska has a certain special pull with Dylan Raiola, and we'll see what that's like when he gets to Lincoln, because yes, he was there for the dead period visit and he went to the basketball game, and he's seen this coaching staff, but he hasn't really been on campus for a true football recruiting visit. And even though these visits would be unofficial, I do think that it's a big opportunity for Nebraska to kind of swing this thing more back in their direction. Right now I would say it's more of a 50-50 type of a toss up.
And it's interesting that Isaiah Garcia Castaneda posted a picture with Rayola kind of working out with him earlier in the week. So whether or not that means something as far as the recruitment goes, I don't know. Whether or not they're just working out and they're friends, it is, whatever. But I just thought it was really interesting because IGC was putting a bug in Rayola's ear. Hey, if you want to come to Nebraska, we can do this and that, and whatever. So I mean, it is interesting to see. I mean, I think it's kind of cool that IGC is telling Rayola to come to Nebraska because I haven't really seen any big social media recruitment like pictures and stuff with current players on the roster. So I mean, well, we'll have to see what happens, but there's no doubt that Nebraska is making a solid push to land Rayola.
And we've talked about this March 25th weekend, this visit weekend. Nebraska, I think, is up to 24 visitors now. It might be even more than that, but I know that basically 20 of them are ranked, inside the top 100. There's 16, four-star recruits. We've written about, a bunch of these guys kind of visiting this week. There's, a couple of guys from Mater D, a couple of twins, brothers from Connecticut, D linemen that are coming to take visits. So, a number of really high profile guys. And, recruiting can be a numbers game. And we've talked about this before, but if you could get even, 25% of these guys to, wind up pledging to Nebraska, then that's going to put your 2024 class in a pretty good spot. So this is a pretty important visit weekend, one of the biggest visit weekends Nebraska has ever had in terms of recruiting. I think coming up March 25th.
And one of the most recent names added was tight end Jaden Riddell, four-star tight end. He's got like a 36 offers: Alabama, Penn State, Georgia, and he can make things happen after the catch. And then you have the Connecticut twins, and one's a defensive tackle, one's a defensive end, and you just talk about the amount of talent on both sides of the football coming. I have to feel like we're going to land at least, 4 or 5 of these kids. And I know 4 or 5 out of 20 isn't necessarily the best ratio, but I'd be extremely happy with that because, I think there's going to be a lot of kids that commit to where Raiola is going wherever he goes. And if it's not Nebraska, at least if we could kind of not pick up the pieces because these are very good players, but if we could, get 5 or 6 in the fold that don't necessarily have an attachment to Rayola, or I guess aren't even offensive guys, that would be a win in my book. Because to me, you know, I would plan as if, we're not landing Dylan Raiola and still recruit hard. I mean, I want to, don't get me wrong, but I mean, it's just a lot of star power and a lot of chances for Nebraska to make an impact on that weekend. So I'll be interested to see, how it plays out.
Yeah, a lot of key in-state, almost all the key in-state guys are going to be there. Obviously, Daniel Kalen's not going to be there because he's committed to Missouri, and that's, been a whole thing of, if, people have been trying to interpret that as, how Nebraska feels about, where it stands with Dylan Raiola. And some people have mentioned that Nebraska, wouldn't allow Daniel Kalen to commit, to Missouri. They would have made a tougher push if they, didn't feel as good about where they are with Dylan Raiola, but it's like he hasn't even come for his visits yet, Dylan Raiola. So I don't think Nebraska's sitting there. I don't think there's some type of silent commitment. I don't think Nebraska has it really any more assurances. I mean, if you think about it, I really think that Dylan Raiola, what this tells me about the spring game is he wants to see Nebraska in action because, when he's talking to USC and Lincoln Riley, he knows what the product's going to look like on the field. I mean, pretty much the same can be said for Georgia. You could even say the same thing about Oregon and Dan Lanning. The one place you can't say that about is Nebraska. He has no idea what the quarter. I mean, yes, he could go back and look at what Matt Rule's done in the past and Marcus Satterfield and all that type of stuff. I get that, but the spring game I think is going to really give him an opportunity to see, what the offense is looking like, how the quarterback position is coached, and I do think it's going to be important for him to see, and kind of see that Nebraska, at least has a high level feel to it. I do think that Matt Rule's going to, project that. But, like I've said a few times, Nebraska is asking Dylan Raiola to take a pretty big leap of faith here. And that's kind of the one thing I'm not sure if the Huskers are going to be able to get over that hurdle.
You almost wish Rayola came in for future classes like 2028 or 2029 so we could kind of get a baseline of what this offense is going to look like. But it's smart on his part, and I don't blame him. I would, you know, do I want to commit right away, like you just said, to, a coaching staff, how we don't know where the pieces are going to go yet? Or, you know, do I want to commit to Lincoln Riley, who's been a quarterback factory and a wide receiver factory with good players that I can have, to throw the ball to. So I don't blame him at all for, wanting to take another look because quite honestly, I would want to do the same thing too. Like, how can I fit? How will this offense best suit me in terms of, helping me play to my strengths? Is it open enough to where they'll let me throw the ball? Because if this is a run based offense, I'm not going to want to come here if I'm a quarterback. If I have the arm talent of Dylan Raiola, I want to air it out at like 75,000 times a game. So, there's all sorts of different things that, Nebraska doesn't have yet that these other schools do. And I think it's really smart for him to kind of, take a look um, at the offense in Lincoln for the spring game and, see what this is. And to be quite honest with you, even the spring game, you can get an idea, but you don't even really know, the nitty gritty of the offense and what it's going to look like until, training camp starts.
Yeah, and so I mean, one thing I think to consider with Nebraska is if they do get a commitment from Raiola, I mean, they're still going to have to back it up, with some wins this season. I don't think he's going to commit to a team that's, with a losing record, and maybe he will. I mean, maybe he'll look past that and he'll just really believe in Matt Rule and what he's doing. So we'll just have to see how that Nebraska, that's why the Huskers are in the mix, though. If it wasn't for his dad and all those ties, I doubt Nebraska would even be in the mix here. So I do think that that factor is real. All the coaching staff getting sent there, the fans giving him the standing ovation. He threw the bones. He understands, those basic kind of things about Nebraska fandom. So I think the Huskers have a legit shot, but they're going to have to knock it out of the park on these visits. And frankly, I think they're going to have to get him back for an official visit in June. I don't think he's going to decide this spring. I've always said that. So look for who gets those official visits in June, because that's when I think this is really going to be decided. So hold on to your hats, folks. We're going to have a few more months of the Dylan Raiola sweepstakes, in my opinion.
And I'll be honest. Look, I know you're all sick of our Dylan Raiola articles. I personally am sick of writing them as well. I want this to be over. I want this to be done. But, you know, this he is the type of player that can completely change the face of a program no matter where he goes. If he goes to Nebraska, he could put them on a trajectory that we haven't seen in quite some time. So, I mean, there there is a reason why he's getting so much press, so much hype. He is that type of player, and the players that could follow him not because he asked them to, but just because they want to play with him as a result could be even bigger. And wherever he goes, wherever he commits to, he will be able to accelerate the program and get them on a winning level. And you can write this down, take a screenshot, but Dylan Raiola will be able to get whatever program he goes to on a winning level, and I hope it's Nebraska.
Yeah, it seems like a good time to segue. We'll have some more of that, but it is going to be a fun time for Nebraska football fans. Is Monday, the Huskers are starting up spring practice. I mean, we're not going to have, obviously a live look at practice or anything, but there's always, intel that's leaking out, reporting, and Nebraska does a pretty good job of putting out, some social media videos and stuff like that, so we can kind of get some breadcrumbs, get some
I
understanding of
love
what's
those
happening.
videos. Those fire me up right away. Those fire
Yeah,
me up, I'll tell you.
they do. They do. And they have a great social media team.
They
So
do.
they do a really good job at that. So I'm excited for those, man. Excited to see, Matt Rule get into it and get on the field. And, there's going to be a lot of storylines from, quarterback to offensive line, a lot of positions on the defensive side of the ball up for grabs. So let's just talk through a few storylines to kind of get you set for spring football on Monday. Danny, I know look, one thing is going to be the quarterback position. That's a big storyline. I'm sure we'll touch on that. But what's a big storyline that's kind of sticking out to you that you're watching with spring ball starting next week?
Thomas Fedoni said a couple weeks ago that he was ready to go for 2023. I know spring ball is not exactly full game action, but I'll be curious to see how the tight end room shapes out. We got Arik Gilbert, we got Thomas Fedoni. People forget that Fedoni was a top ranked recruit, and I'm not even saying, okay, like he's got to do this or, I'm going to hate him. I just really want to see him healthy because he is a good football player. And if Nebraska can get production out of the tight end position this year and Fedoni can, live up to the billing he was given, then that would be a great story. So that's one, um, that's one thing I'm looking at this spring. And then I'm trying to think of another. I think, you know, how I'm not going to say there's a quarterback battle, but I'll be interested to see how many, reps, Casey Thompson gets in terms of healing from his, surgery and things like that. He said he's ready to go, you know, and I'm sure he'll be in a decent spot before the season begins, but I'm just a little iffy on the quarterback position, not because of Thompson's talent, but just because of that injury. Uh, and recovery time. And then the last thing, obviously, is offensive line. This is a big year for Donovan Raiola and that line. There have been some added pieces, and there have been some new faces added to the program. But you know the work starts now, and this is a huge year for Donovan Raiola, like we said before, because in my opinion, if he doesn't perform well this year, or the line doesn't perform well this year, he's not going to be back next year. So I know that's a lot of offensive storylines, but there are a lot of intriguing pieces with this offense, and I'd say definitely more good question marks than bad ones.
Yeah, I think with the offensive line, I'm interested to see how, things shake out in terms of where everybody plays. Does Ben Scott play center? Does who plays right tackle, who plays like right guard? I'm interested to see if, Nebraska trying to get its five best guys on the field, if they're going to move Ben Hart or Corcoran, one of those guys, to guard. I would think that that would be, a natural move. I'm not sure, which. I know Corcoran played guard to start last year, and he played left tackle. Neither of them played particularly well at tackle last year. So I'm just interested to see what Nebraska thinks that top five maybe looks like on the offensive line. And yeah, Fedoni, I think, is a great storyline for spring ball because, he was when he gave his press conference, he was talking about like coaches last year were wondering why he couldn't play, and he couldn't get the medical clearance, which I think to me is a great sign that he was able to make plays on the scout team, because that shows like spring ball is not going to be the first time he's back on the field. This is going to be maybe his first time with the number one offense again, but I think if he can just get through this spring healthy and kind of move forward, I think he's going to be ready to start and ready for a big season in the fall. So that's another good storyline. But I definitely am watching the quarterback position and not just the top two guys. I am interested to see, because Matt Rule's talked about like Heinrich Harburg and how fast he is, and Chuba Purdy and Torres. I'm interested if any of those guys can, get into the mix or, challenge for even that number three job. That might be interesting in terms of who's going to stay here, Logan Smothers included. People probably forget that guy's even on the roster, but so there's some other guys I'm interested to see what happens with them at quarterback. And yeah, how much is Casey Thompson going to throw? I feel like a lot of people are just handing this job over to Jeff Sims, and I think that's a mistake. I think that, look, if you look at Matt Rule's offenses going back to Baylor, and not that I watched a ton of Baylor football, but it's not like he's running a Lamar Jackson offense. I mean, he always had accurate passers. I mean, guys that could run if they needed to, but I feel like having an accurate passer and somebody who's going to take care of the football, is going to be more important. And I think push comes to shove, I still think that Casey Thompson is better in that area than Jeff Sims. And Jeff Sims, is below a 60% career passer. He has more career interceptions than Casey Thompson. So I do think it's going to be a legitimate battle. But to me, Casey Thompson is a better thrower of the football right now. And, until I see that Jeff Sims can, match kind of his deep ball and his accuracy, throw into tight ends. You have to be an accurate passer to throw those tight ends, and put them in a position to succeed. So I have a lot of question marks about Jeff Sims still.
And also another storyline that I can't, gloss over is wide receiver. And it's not, oh, who's going to, do we have enough depth at wide receiver? Heck yeah, we do. It's just a question of who we're going to put out there. I mean, there's a ton of names that we can, kind of list. If we wanted to, we could play mix and match, and that's not something we've always had either. So it's nice to have that be a problem, but I'm curious to see, what a starting wide receiver lineup looks like, because, there's a lot of talent at the position and there's a lot of people in the room. So, you know, this is going to be a very crucial spring ball, I think, for the wide receiver position, because, if you're not performing, or if, you're not on the field, there's just a lot of mouths to feed. And I honestly would expect maybe a couple guys to, maybe leave after the spring, just because there's just so much, talent and players at that position.
Yeah, and it will be interesting to see, Xavier Betts and Garcia Castaneda, how those guys kind of establish themselves this spring. Marcus Washington, Billy Kemp. There's some freshmen coming in, but like with Malachi Coleman, I don't believe he's an early enrollee. I could be wrong, but I believe he's enrolling later. So, I
Yeah.
mean, those guys, he still can have an impact, but that's going to slow his impact, I think, a little bit. And to me, I really think that, Xavier Betts, if he can come in here and have a solid spring, I mean, all reports are he's looking good. He's always had the physical tools, so, and he was productive his first couple of years at Nebraska. It just didn't quite take off. And then he had, those other issues and all that. But if he can get his head on straight and he can put together a solid spring, I mean, I see no reason why, he couldn't lock down a starting position going into the fall.
Yeah, and like you said, he's put on weight, and he says he's the fastest he's ever been, and he was pretty damn fast last time he played for Nebraska. So, I'll be interested to see how that wide receiver position shakes out, and what faces we see. I know there's a lot more coming in later, but I wouldn't, if I was here for spring ball, I wouldn't rest on my laurels because these new wide receivers are going to be coming in, and they're going to be coming in hot and I think there's going to be a lot of competition at the position, and maybe not now, but definitely a storyline for fall camp in terms of who we're going to see out there.
Yeah, and I mean there are some interesting, I think, position battles on the defensive side of the ball too. And if you look at guys that have enrolled early, I mean, in terms of freshmen, Prince William Mamalian, Cameron Lenhart, Gunnar Gutula, Maverick Nunes. So there's quite a few guys on defense. Kai Wallen. So I mean, there's really what's interesting there is you've got Nebraska needs help at edge. I mean, that was a clear need, and they've got 4 edge rushers that are enrolled early. Chief Borders is right there. MJ Sherman, Jamari Butler, Blaze Gunnerson. So there's a lot of depth. That's one thing I'm kind of watching at on defense. And that's obviously it is hard in spring ball because you're only going to get so many live pass rush chances, but they do get the one-on-one opportunities and stuff like that. And I'm interested to see who kind of emerges from that group. And then some of these other guys too. Like Josh Fleeks is a guy at receiver that we probably forgot about. Is going to be interesting there, and Jacob Hood on the offensive line. So with some of these transfers, kind of see how they fit in with things. Corey Collier is an interesting guy. How is he going to fit in? With the secondary, which essentially returns all of its starters. You know what I mean, with Farmer and Buford, Newsome, and Hartzog. So there's some nice pieces. I feel like with Nebraska in the back end, you've got Reimer and Heinrich at linebacker. You've got your secondary pretty much set. That defensive line in the front is going to be interesting to see. Where Ty Robinson fits in. Some of the other holdovers last year, and where some of these new pieces fit in, and how Tony White is kind of aligning them in the 3-3-5. I know that's the system, but I just think he's going to use a lot of multiple things. So I'm interested to see how he kind of uses all those chess pieces. I know we aren't going to see a lot this spring, but I think we'll get a better idea than we have right now.
And it's interesting because Borders was, fired up for Tony White's defense a couple weeks ago when he met with the media. He said, quote, he wants to do really anything to do what's best for the team. This 3-3-5 is definitely something that you all will be excited to see. It's very maneuverable, so I plan on doing what's best for the team. Right now, I'm at linebacker, but I plan on doing a plethora of other things if told to do so. And then he kind of went into, what he views the 3-3-5 to be, and he said, quote, you can rush off the edge, you can drop, you can head up the ball as a stack linebacker. You're able to not just put yourself in a box and strictly play one position, and this is what you have to do the whole time. So with the athleticism that Borders has, I'll be interested to see where he plays on that defense because I think it offers him a lot of freedom with the type of physical roaming game that he has.
Yeah, and I could see him kind of in a role like, I know this defense isn't the same as last year, but Caleb Tanner, who at times, was an edge rusher. At times he was more of
Yep.
a traditional linebacker. I think that's perfect for Chief Borders. And the one thing you really have to like about Matt Rule in this defense and this coaching staff is they brought in speed. Borders
Mhm.
has speed. MJ Sherman has speed. So I feel like even though, and Eric Fields, is a guy, I don't think he's
Yep.
enrolled early. I
No.
have to double check. But anyway, I feel like linebacker and running back have always, to me, been two positions where it's a little bit easier to, not that you don't have to know the scheme, but it's a little easier to just go play and hit. So I feel like Eric Fields is going to still jump into the mix, as we get into the fall. But like a few people have pointed out, I know Steve Sipples has, kind of hammered this point home a lot since the rule transition. But Nebraska's got basically eight starters coming back on this defense, and I know they lost Ernest Hausman, and that really was a bummer. But I feel like this defense is better than people are giving it credit for.
Yeah, and you mentioned speed. We ran the 3-3-5 with Eric Shenander, when he was here, but we just didn't have the speed to run it efficiently and correctly. And I think that's going to change under Matt Rule, and a guy like Borders is a perfect example, and the 8 returning guys, also should be able to make an impact. And you mentioned a guy like Eric Fields. He was a guy I was really high on back in December when he signed here. He has a ton of speed as a linebacker. So, you know, you're not just seeing, players, proverbial pieces thrown at the wall to see if they stick in this defense. You're seeing an effort on speed and athleticism, which will, serve well in a 3-3-5.
And one thing I really am interested to see is I think we're going to see a really physical spring. I think you're going to see a lot of hitting, and it sounds like we're going to see an actual football game for the spring game. Where they keep score, have a, that's what I'm hoping. But I want to see just how this is all kind of trimmed down, because I mean Matt Rule talked about it. He said guys have decisions to make. That's why we want to be transparent with the depth chart. They already have the depth chart listed right now, so guys know where they stand. I like that, and I think it's really going to be a very competitive spring. And I do think that we're going to see a lot of guys transfer out when it gets over, and hopefully maybe a few guys transfer in, like an offensive tackle or an edge rusher. But so still going to see some movement on this roster, I think, too.
And Matt Rule's emphasized that he doesn't want, willy nilly, silly contact where, injuries could occur at any moment. He wants smart contact, he wants physical, but he doesn't want, reckless. And I think that's important too, because I think there is a way to, have smart contact without it being, overly crazy or overly physical. Because, quite honestly, I think that in a lot of situations in the previous regime, we weren't prepared for a physical contact type of game. It's sometimes it just seemed like we were playing Yahtzee during practice and not, trying to at least put some guys safely on the ground. So I like the emphasis on smart physical contact and, trying to, simulate game situations.
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty baffling after, Scott Frost got hired, and it kind of, Bruce Feldman had all that reporting about how little Nebraska actually like tackles in practice. And it's just like, are you, and it's like, so you can see on the field how poorly they tackle every week. And it's like, well, you don't practice it. So obviously you're going to
You
suck
don't
at it.
say, really. You don't say.
Like, I mean, they say practice makes perfect, and that may be hyperbole to a point, but you do need to practice to
If you
get
don't
better
tackle
at
to begin
things.
with, and you wonder why you're not getting better. That may be why. Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, I don't think that's going to be a problem with Matt Rule. Like he said, he is an old school guy, old school football guy. And I have to say too, I saw that him and Trev and Tom Osborne had like they put something on the Huskers
I'm gonna
YouTube
have to
page.
watch that.
I'm gonna have to check that out because I love Tom Osborne.
Oh yeah.
I know people get a little sick of the Osborne days and stuff, but give me Dr. Tom any day of the week talking about football, and I'm there.
It's not that I don't like Tom Osborne. It's just that people think of like what Tom Osborne says as gospel, and we should follow it 100% of the time.
Yeah,
He's a great football mind, but to constantly refer to him for advice and say, "Oh, well, Osborne did this," like, yeah, that was almost like 25 years ago. So I do
yeah.
love Tom Osborne. I just feel like fans get stuck on him a bit at times.
Yeah, it was 26 years ago. I mean, he won 3 decades ago. So I mean, we can celebrate him and his genius, and
Absolutely, absolutely.
but yeah, I don't think the current head coach should be, outside of some organizational things and stuff. There shouldn't be, I don't think Tom has that much insight on how to run a current program, and he would probably say that.
Yeah,
He
100%.
But anyways, I'm interested to see that conversation. I do like that Matt Rule has really kind of embraced the history of Nebraska, though. It's like
Yeah.
it's a pressure cooker, but I like that he wants that, and this is the kind of job he's been waiting for. So, I think the NFL career was a misstep for him, just like it was, like Steve Spurrier or Nick Saban. So, Nick Saban went to the Dolphins and he turned around a sleeping giant. So maybe Matt Rule can do the same here at
And Rule
Nebraska.
still gets the NFL money, so I mean, he's not bad, right? Not bad right now.
It's a win-win situation. So, um, All right, folks. Well, we are going to wrap it up here. Make sure that you're, checking out HuskerBigRed.com. We're going to have a ton of written content, on recruiting, spring football. I'm going to have a defensive depth chart up there. I released my offensive one last week. So, and that is just kind of where, I see things as of right now, but we'll have a lot more recruiting information. And we're going to talk about some position battles on Monday and kind of go through the depth chart for the Huskers. So make sure you join us for that and hit the subscribe button. Make sure you hit that like button and get into the comment section. Let us know what you think or any other topics you would like us to talk about that relate to the Huskers. So have a great weekend. And as always, go Big Red.
Go Big Red.